In this segment I'll be introducing the concept of fractions, and I'm going to be doing something a little different this time. I'm going to be making a link to a website that talks about the 5 different meanings of fractions. So here we are at the website. It's a Canadian website, and it's a Canadian website from the University of Winnipeg up here at the top. And I just wanted to use this website just to point out some things to people so that they can understand that there are 5 different meanings to fractions, and they've talked about them here and how they're important to be understood by students in the middle years. And as they say here, the first 3 meanings should be developed earlier on, and then the 4th and 5th meaning need to be developed in the middle years, but definitely before they get to the high school. So the first one I want to talk about is the cut meaning, also known as the parts of a whole meaning, and this is the one that we're most familiar with, and this is the one that most students work with. This is the one most teachers talk about, where the top of the fraction is the number of pieces that you're highlighting or coloring in, so that's shaded in region here, and the bottom number is the denominator, and it tells us how many pieces it's being cut into. But there's some aspects to this that we must understand. When we are talking about this, there's this equivalent or equal aspect to the segments. So when we're talking about this parts of a whole, we're talking about the area has to be is what we're considering. So in this question, it could be length, it could be area, it could be volume. But when we cut this circle here, for example, into 2 equal parts, and we're shading one of the same parts, that's okay. This question here can throw some people. If I wanted to say 1/8, is this 1/8 area in here classified as the same as this 1/8 area here? And that's a very difficult concept for a lot of students and for some adults actually. I now have this large rectangle cut into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. They have different shapes to them, but they have equal area to them, and therefore they would be classified as, each of these 8 pieces could be classified as 1/8. The second meaning is the part of a group or a set, or part of a group or part of a set meaning. And this one doesn't involve cutting it into equal parts, nor does it talk about natural wholes. So when we're talking about cutting up pies or cutting up pizzas, we're talking about something that's naturally something that's in whole units. So in this one, as we might be talking about, there are 23 books, and 14 of them are novels, so I could write a fraction that goes 14 over 23, which talks about 14 out of 23 books. Now we are still talking about books, so in that way they're the same kinds of things, but we could have novels, we could have comic books, we could have picture books, we could have non-novels, so they're not necessarily talking about the same kinds of things, and they're not talking about the same size novels. You can have little tiny books and really large books and big thick books. The 14 out of 23 doesn't imply that the 14 are the same size of all 23. So in this question you're talking about parts of a group or parts of a set, and it doesn't imply that they have to have equal size pieces or equal area or equal volume or equal length. And this one's a little harder to understand for many people. This next one is the name of a point, or a measure meaning, and this one people know but they don't really think about it. When we talk about 1/4, 1/4 is its own number. It has its own meaning. It doesn't necessarily have to talk about I got 1 out of 4 pieces. 1/4 is a unique place on a number line. It's the name for that unique place, just like 2/4 and 3/4 are also on the number line, but they are unique places on the number line. They are unique numbers in and of themselves. They are its own individual entity. So 3/4 is an individual number, just like the number 1 or the number 2 is an individual number. And so you can be working with these individual entities, these individual numbers, by themselves. So it's not necessarily parts of a whole. And this is where when you're talking with operations, we're doing the operation to the whole fraction. The other reason why it's sometimes called the measure quantity is because when we do make a number line, we divide them into equal segments, and we use these individual numbers, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, to measure them, and so we often call them the measuring meaning of the fraction as well. The fourth meaning is the ratio, and we could write 3/4, which could be 3/4. It has nothing to do with wholes or groups or the names of the points that we've talked about up until now. It's simply making a comparison. And so often when we talk about using ratios, we can use a ratio, we can use the notation of the 5 and the word 2, 3, so we're comparing 5 things to 3 things. We could use the colon technique of 5.3, and we could use the fraction technique 5/3, but a lot of people don't like using the 5/3 because they think that now somehow it's an improper fraction or that it's talking about parts of a whole. But remember, we're just comparing one entity to another entity, and therefore we can use it as a ratio. And writing it in the fraction form often allows us to do calculations much easier. For example, if we want to equate two ratios when solving a problem, we might say I have 7 out of 10, and what would that be if I want to keep the same ratio of something out of 5? And so now we could use that x over 5 is equal to 7/10 format or notation, and we can then use our rules for solving proportions or our rules for solving missing pieces for algebra to help find that piece. So we can write a fraction as a ratio. Sometimes there's some confusion, and I've been online to find out this. Can you rewrite the fraction of parts to parts, parts to whole, or do they have to be parts to a whole? And technically you could have any of those techniques, but it's usually written as a ratio of a part to a whole. But as you can see here, it could be parts to parts, and so it can be an improper fraction or an improper looking fraction. The final meaning, that slash line that we call the fraction line, indicates that it's division. So if I have a fraction 1/2, we could say it's 1/2, but we could also mean that that means 1 divided by 2. So we could write the dividing by symbol using the line with the 2 dots. And if we go 1 divided by 2 on my calculator, I'm going to get the answer of 0.5. If I went 3/4, 3 divided by 4 gives me 0.75. And so it's important for students to understand that that slash also means that there's division involved. And we can connect it back to the first one. We're dividing the whole into how many pieces. And when we do division, there's an implied meaning that we're talking equal size pieces. So this is again related to the first example that we did, showing that we can have a parts to a whole meaning, but it also can indicate that we're dividing, and we're dividing that whole into its parts. So there's the 5 different meanings for fractions. I wanted to spend a couple moments making sure that people are aware of the 5 different meanings, even though we spend a lot of our time with the parts to whole kind of concept. And the following videos that I'll be doing on fractions will probably be dealing almost exclusively with the parts of the whole.